And because what did people do once the pandemic started? You had so many people dust off their bikes and buy bicycles and all of a sudden try new trail systems throughout the world, which is really fun to watch and see. I think it also taught us how fragile our system is. And hopefully we're rethinking how how we've kind of commuted, how we've gone to work, how we've lived, our choices. And it's kind of been really interesting and fun to have conversations with people that never really thought about it before. And that's what we hope to continue to stimulate as we go forward. So the 82 Alliance is focused on several different initiatives. And Stacy, if you can flip. What we're looking at is continuing to make investments in public transit throughout the globe so we can maintain and expand our systems, continued investment in protected bike lanes, trails, and any type of cycling amenities, investing in mobility technology that not only enhances the experience, but also has a positive environmental impact. And I think that's a really fine line to walk. The tech is great, but if at the end of the day, we're worse off for it, that's not the type of enhancement we'd like to see. Investment in the sidewalks and continuing to make sure they're a priority during climate, that we maintain those and build those and connect our communities. Supporting broadband for all, that should just be a no-brainer before the pandemic, but we got to see how important it is to be interconnected so we can stay connected as a society. Investing in technology that incentivizes carpooling and vanpooling, to look at the modes that we have and the assets that we have and how to further develop those. To partner with architects, builders, developers, and funders to connect affordable housing to mobility options. And that's something that, unfortunately, in a lot of the stories and data that you see, how the people that were already at a disadvantage suffered greatly during this pandemic. And how do we plot forward a path where we can actually make sure that those people are integrated into the system and are benefiting from all the advancements in technology and all the trails and everything else that we're seeing. And similar with the ADA community, to make sure their needs are met. So you saw great things where we worked throughout North America and the world to better serve restaurants and allow them to take parking spaces. But unfortunately, a lot of them took sidewalks, and that limited the ADA's community and kind of prohibited them from their movement and hurt them. So how do we make sure that that doesn't happen again? Supporting electrification, obviously EVs is a big push going forward, but we're looking at electrifying the buses, shuttles, van pools versus just electrifying cars, because I truly feel at the end of the day, if we just electrify cars, we haven't really achieved what we would envision and hope for the future. And then supporting AV deployment and standards that prioritize public transit, shuttles, and van pools. So AV technology is great if it moves a lot of people, but not if it's moving just single occupancy vehicles. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. And if your community is looking to try to figure out those challenges or your particular challenges, we're a nonprofit and we'd love to help with that. Please reach out and contact myself or Maureen and Stacy. And then, a quote I heard during this time was, if things were easy, it wouldn't be worth it. A lot of these challenges are very hard, and funding's an issue, and design's an issue, and lots of different challenges. But, that's what kind of makes it fun. It's worthwhile to, have the ideas and the vision, and then to make it a reality. And I really think we can. And I just would challenge you to not accept the norm and to push in your community and continue to innovate. And that's why we're excited to partner with DSM&G, who has innovated throughout their history, and our speakers today. So excited to have this and welcome. And I'm going to turn it over to Lois Demeester, the CEO of Destination Sales and Marketing, for a few words.
Well, thank you, Rob. We really appreciate that. And we're really, really proud to support you and your team in this new endeavor that's 82 Alliance. I really especially like the cherry tree and the symbolism behind that. So many of you that are joining us today in the webinar may recognize DSM&G from our transportation demand management work with one of our major clients, who is Arlington County Commuter Services, located in Arlington, Virginia. Or maybe through the years, you've been involved with Arlington's digital think tank and research center, which is the Mobility Lab. Or you might have participated through the years as well with us in conjunction with the Transportation Research Board at Transportation Camp, which is always a very exciting way to start out the new year. I would like to say that our vision through a partnership with 82 Alliance is to bring compelling transportation policy and best practice subject matter to the forefront and to convene panel discussions like we are today. Maybe publish some occasional opinion briefs on topics that are vital for new innovations coming to the forefront, things that you just saw and read Rob go through. We want to really be a part of the smart cities of the future, I think. So we hope you all enjoy today's webinar, and certainly we welcome any and all feedback and comments that you might have for us today as we continue this really important programming. So with that, we'll get started, and I'll turn you back over to Rob, and we can get started with our first panel speaker.
Thank you, Lois.
Yeah.
So we have a wonderful panel that is a great, I think, cross representation of what's going on in the world, in particular North America. And I'm just going to introduce them first, and then I'm going to turn it over to Roger. So Roger Brown is the Acting Director of Traffic Management and lead on the Move To initiative for the City of Toronto, Canada. The Move To initiative is a city staff action to help manage congestion and build a more resilient, modern, and safe transportation system. The initiative includes proposed implementation of smart signals, intelligent intersections, advanced traffic signal priority, construction hubs, and transportation demand management. He also oversees the city's 2,400 traffic signals in terms of planning, design, construction, maintenance, and operation, the city's traffic operations center, all traffic safety, efficiency, and related investigation, work zone coordination, and both the city traffic agents and school crossing guard program. The respective units within his section actively support both the city's Vision Zero road safety plan and the Move To congestion management plan. We'll also be joined by Ryan Croft, Transit Screen co-founder and Georgetown entrepreneur in residence. So Ryan is a co-founder of Transit Screen, a Washington, D.C. based company providing commute management solutions focused on real-time transportation information throughout the employee life cycle. He's a trustee at DC-based Federal City Council and previously served on the board of directors of ACT, the Association for Commuter Transportation, and the board of directors for Give and Surf, a nonprofit based in Bocas del Toro, Panama. Ryan's a frequent speaker at conferences and universities on transportation, technology, real estate tech, urban mobility, travel, entrepreneurship, including Code for America, Google, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, Harvard, and many different CES, South by Southwest, and different conferences throughout the world. So we're excited to have Ryan as well. And also on the panel, we're very excited to have Jordan Davis, the Director of Smart Cities Columbus Partnership. So Jordan was instrumental in Columbus becoming the sole winner of the U.S. Department of Transportation's Smart City Challenges in 2016. Jordan's played a founding role as the Director of the Smart Columbus Partnership, leading strategy and partnership for deploying emerging technologies to improve people's lives and cities. In her role, she has overseen one of the country's first self-driven vehicle deployments, formed partnerships with over 100 different organizations representing $720 million of aligned investment, and directed Columbus's effort to increase electric vehicle adoption by nearly 500%, world records for EV education, and leading the Midwest in market growth. She's most recently incepted Can't Stop Columbus, a grassroots innovation movement responding to the unprecedented challenges of COVID-19. The effort has attracted over 600 virtual volunteers, launched over 30 projects in 12 different issue areas of the community, and is now organizing to be a permanent organizing platform for civic tech and skilled volunteering into the future. So we're very excited to have our three speakers, and if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. And first, I'm going to turn it over to Roger.
Thanks for the introduction, Rob. As you mentioned, my name is Roger Brown. I'm the Director for Traffic Management at the City of Toronto. And I guess maybe if I can bring my screen up, you know, when it comes to the impacts of COVID-19 and sort of our perspective on things, at the City of Toronto, we're very, very much data-driven. And in terms of our decision making, and fortunately, we have a lot of data at our disposal. Obviously, we have data from our traffic signals. We have a contract with HERE. We have a contract with Waze. So when we look at the data, as you can see on your screen right now, we've developed a travel time index for the City of Toronto, And we've been actively monitoring what the impacts have been in terms of the COVID-19 on traffic. And as you can see here, going back to March, when the time the World Health Organization declared the pandemic, you can see the travel times dropping, literally plummeting at the very beginning there. And within the province of Ontario, we've been going through various stages of sort of reopening as the numbers were sort of under control by way of the spread of COVID-19. And so when we had a stage 1 reopening, we started to see an increase in traffic volumes in stage 2 and stage 3. And each of the various stages of reopening that our province implemented basically meant that more amenities were kind of open to the public, that they could be out and about again. And likewise, you can see the commensurate growth. The key thing here is that if you look at that one solid line across there in terms of the baseline, within Toronto, we still haven't seen traffic return back to the way patterns used to be. But the traffic volumes are kind of leveled off. And we went into another lockdown mode recently, if I go beyond this graph, and saw the numbers plummet again. So what is that really telling us? Well, it's one thing to say that we saw a 15 to 40% drop in terms of traffic volumes. But the traffic patterns themselves are very erratic. Nothing is the same. And if you think about what the implications are for us, you need to recall that our traffic signals are basically timed based on traffic volumes. And if the traffic patterns are erratic, then obviously that minimizes our effectiveness, our ability to deal with and manage traffic effectively. In parallel with that, as you can see at the bottom there, bottom corner, in terms of our transit ridership, we saw a 60% drop in terms of transit ridership. And again, you would expect that. COVID-19 and people not being out and about because they're working from home, or even just general paranoia about being in tight confined spaces. That being said, we did notice that despite the fact there was a drop in ridership, that we still experienced overcrowding at specific times of the day in terms of our transit as well too. So again, giving us the, sort of that laying the ground in terms of where we need to go, where we need to invest to sort of mitigate the implications of COVID-19. And Rob, you made a comment in your introduction there, which is so true. I know all around North America, but certainly in Toronto, Canada, we saw a marked increase in terms of active modes of transportation. A lot more people walking around, as I say here, 15 to 80%, especially on weekends. And again, people are locked away in their homes, and the only time for them to really be kind of free out and about, seeing a significant increase in both pedestrian and cycling traffic during specific more than anything else on weekends, and obviously through the summer and late into the fall as well. And just a side note, I mean, this has always been the case, at least for the past couple of years. I don't know if I should take pride in saying this, but we are the busiest city in all of North America right now in terms of construction. We boast, I think, a statistic that most jurisdictions use and across North America is the number of cranes in the sky. In Toronto, Canada, we have 120 cranes in the sky right now. And it's been that way for the past couple of years. And with the lightening traffic, my staff have basically been getting a lot more permissions towards allowing construction to take place and to try and get things done. So really, this is kind of the lay of the land. And this is how, our view is really kind of changed with respect to the impacts of the pandemic. And it kind of lays a bit of the groundwork with respect to where we need to go in terms of the new congestion management plan going forward. So my apologies, Rob. I know that was a whole mouthful there. I don't know if you're expecting me to go on through the whole, or if you want me to just kind of maybe talk specifically about what we're going to do over the next 5 years, or.
Yeah, if you want to do that, that'd be great.
Yeah. Okay. I only have the one other slide here. So, as Rob mentioned, so going back, the City of Toronto has a congestion management plan, as most cities in North America do. But I have to admit, and our initiative really started around 2014. That being said, in previous years, the focus of our congestion management plan has been very much fixated on moving cars, right? Moving cars, moving transit to a lesser extent. However, one of the big things that the pandemic has taught us is we're seeing so much more in terms of active traffic management that the onus really is on us to build a much more resilient system that has the ability to deal with these erratic traffic patterns, but a much more fulsome system as well too that deals with all modes of transportation. So the next round of our congestion management plan, we've actually renamed it as well as Move TO for the next 5 years. And we're going to be investing $110 million largely on infrastructure transportation technologies, focused in the 5 areas that we described here. So number one, we're going to be adding 500 new smart signals. So these are adaptive signals that really sense those erratic patterns of traffic around and change the timings to accommodate that. Where smart signals are still kind of traditional, dealing with cars and transit, that kind of thing. Intelligent intersections actually focuses on minimizing delays to pedestrians and cyclists at intersections. Again, in various parts of the city, we're seeing a lot more active modes of transportation, where we want to implement things like pedestrian and cyclist detection and have those tied into our traffic signals. And that becomes part of the decision-making process about how much time is given to the various modes of traffic at that intersection. Advanced transit signal priority. So the city of Toronto has right now about 400 of our 2,500 signals under transit signal priority. But obviously that issue I mentioned before about the crowding of buses, it's even now more than ever imperative that we get our transit on schedule more than anything else. And as some of you may know, transit signal priority, it's all about that. It's about allowing buses to get permission that signals to keep them on schedule. And this program here is really about accelerating that effort through technology to get an additional 200 locations implemented over the next 5 years. I did notice in the chat, there's an individual, maybe a couple of individuals from Seattle on this call. A big shout out to the folks in Seattle. The Construction Hub is actually a program that we started in City of Toronto as a result of lessons that we learned from the folks in Seattle. So this is, I'll give credit where credit is due. This is actually a Seattle program that found its way to City of Toronto, Canada. And we did it as a pilot last year. It was a huge success. It's really about, if I put it in a nutshell, logistical planning of the right-of-way and using technology, the software applications out there to help us in terms of determining which streets can be closed simultaneously without crippling neighborhoods, basically. So as I say, it's a great program. We initiated last year as a pilot, huge success from the pilot. And hopefully my friend from Seattle can report to your counterparts there that now City of Toronto is looking to expand it to 3 other locations within the city. And then lastly, but certainly not least, is really taking advantage of the fact that people have been learning, businesses have been learning much more about the whole idea of teleworking and people working from home. The whole idea of having a travel demand management strategy, a proper one. Again, we don't want to turn the City of Toronto into a ghost town where everybody works from home. But at the same extent, if there's certain businesses or BIAs that don't need to have all their staff coming in, then maybe those folks continue to work from home. And for the people who are coming in to the downtown core, maybe it's a case where they come in staggered at various times of day, that kind of thing, to avoid the situation from a COVID-19 perspective of having all these people sort of fighting to get in the elevator at 9 a.m. in the morning, but at the same extent having a significant impact in terms of lightening the load on the transportation infrastructure. So in a nutshell, that's the 5 sort of pronged plan that we have. As I mentioned, it's a fairly significant investment for us, especially in the middle of a pandemic when obviously we're suffering from a budget shortfall, but it was unanimously approved by our city council to invest that additional $110 million over the next 5 years to support this program. So I think that sort of covers off in a bit of a nutshell in terms of what we kind of learned through the pandemic and the direction that we're going through our Move TO program. Thanks, Rob.
Great. Thank you, Roger. I think Stacy, if you could pull up the one platform, and while we're doing that, I wanted to ask Jordan, so I guess can you give an overview of, I guess, what your program is focusing on now, kind of during pandemic and then post? And if you want to maybe do a little history.
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Rob. Great stuff, Roger. It's good to hear all that you guys are working on. So quick history, 2016, Columbus, which is really in the heart of America, the capital city of Ohio, right in the center. So actually the largest city in Ohio, although it might not have the brand ID as much of a Cleveland and Cincinnati might. But it is fast growing, and we are the largest city without light rail. And so when we bid our vision for the Smart Cities Challenge, we really kind of thought about our ecosystem, which and how we could use technology to really close the transportation gaps with a specific focus on equity. And so we are now 4 years in. All projects are in the wild. They are in the community, with the exception that the electrification program has actually completed. So we actually met our goals pre-pandemic, which was to increase electric vehicle adoption by 500%. And then the other portfolio of work, which are around emerging technologies such as the connected vehicles. We have our second autonomous vehicle shuttle deployment, a multimodal trip planning and common payment system application, emergency health mobility solution. So those are all now still being tested. I would say in COVID, participation rates will be dramatically affected on everything. Even if you think, well, connected vehicle environment doesn't really, impact it. Absolutely. A lot of people are not driving. So the activity on those roadways is lower. The participation of getting volunteers to get something installed in their car is lower. So we are absolutely anticipating that. But those will all conclude in June. The backbone of our work is a Smart Columbus operating system, which is a open source data management platform that we've been using. You can go on that to get the real-time data on all these projects as well. But the grants we always saw as a seed to a larger transformation in the community to really facilitate the continued growth of the region, but to close the gaps. Some of the things that we've been exploring and have continued to grow, and I'm going to speak as a region, so the royal we, I can play games all day long of who's doing what, and I'm happy to help connect you all to the right players if there's interesting pieces that you want to learn about. But we've been thinking a lot, we're a Midwest city with regional sprawl, about on-demand service, and can a bus network really facilitate that? So we have a corridor study with flagship corridors that have been identified that will take years to realize. How do we think about micro transit and kind of the mobility ecosystem that supports that in the first mile, last mile gap solution? So a few things that we've done: the Transit Authority has deployed micro transit in now 3 neighborhoods, 2 of which they've launched amidst COVID, which I think is a really interesting angle. So they've decreased overall service, and certain routes have been suspended during the time, or they've created new routes. They've gone free, so all the fares are free during COVID, but then launching these micro transit to get closer to home, less people on a vehicle, and those have been very successful. We have a lot of work, both in our program and beyond in the community, on commuting, not so flagship as I would say maybe Seattle has, but in a similar fashion, working with the private sector on goals and interventions that can change the way our residents are commuting. So a few things that we've done. So incentive-wise, the downtown property owners, in partnership with the Transit Authority, have assessed a fee to provide free transit for all downtown workers. That's about 40,000 people. And so we actually had that up for renewal amidst COVID. And you can imagine downtown is not as busy as it used to be. So we're really proud to say that the property owners did vote to continue that assessment and actually increase the cost. So that will now be continued for another 5 years. And we think there's a lot of hope there that people are going to be returning back to work next year and using that. So we're really excited about that. And then in terms of, obviously remote work has taken the predominant behavior, especially across our largest companies. So when you think of commuter traffic, our biggest employers are not looking like they're going to come back until June. But we have been consulting with our companies a lot to think through what their marketing and communication campaigns will be when they invite their employees to return to work. How will they talk about using shared transportation or public transportation? So how can they broach those issues, even if there's concerns of of health and safety. So we have gotten involved in those spaces and doing some human design sprints to really understand what the employee is expecting and how we can design programs and interventions to support them in that transition and trust back into those systems. The other thing I'll just touch on is goods movement continues to be, I think many cities are seeing that as a significant increase. So drop off delivery zones, the use of the right of way. And we've been not only keeping pulse on that, we did do a pilot with a startup to better manage loading zones. And we actually have a best practices document I can share as we've now concluded that pilot. But we've also been partnering with our food bank to think about how we get food to residents that need it most. So we're working on a pilot of delivery pods in a lower income neighborhood to deliver fresh food. And then we've actually pivoted the use case of our autonomous vehicle in a lower income neighborhood, different than the pods. So it was moving passengers between a transit stop and a residential development and a community center. And now we're going from the food pantry to neighborhood locations and residences. And so we deliver about 100 boxes of food a week through that. So those are some of the use case pivots of the technology that we've been seeing. And I think that gives you, and then I guess I would also say one of the biggest new projects amidst COVID and beyond will be digital divide. So we are working on some pilot deployments of new Wi-Fi technologies to hopefully close that gap.
Great. It's pretty innovative what you were doing and then what you're continuing to kind of evolve. Yeah, and it's pretty neat to hear. Ryan, given your perspective now at Georgetown and all the different things you're doing now, I'd love to hear what you think as far as mobility and some of the things that you're working on.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay? Thumbs up. Awesome.
Yep.
I know there's some AV issues. First, I just want to say thanks, Rob, Wendy, and Maureen. It's a pleasure to join. Thanks for including me, and to be on this with Roger and Jordan is great. So I appreciate that. Quick bio, I'm Ryan Croft. I'm a DC-based startup founder and advisor and board member, and my specific focus area is transportation. I come at this from a little bit different angle than the previous two speakers, more from the entrepreneurial side. I was a co-founder of Transit Screen, and for those of you who don't know the story, we spun out of Lois's organization in some ways, the Mobility Lab in 2013 in Arlington County. It was a grant-funded program, and my co-founder Matt and I were able to commercialize it. And now we've grown to be a self-sustaining startup based in DC, a couple blocks from the White House and World Bank, for better or worse. But it's been a really fun journey. What is Transit Screen? It's a commute management software. We started really early on working with real estate developers. You might have seen these large information displays in lobbies of buildings, working with a lot of data and putting information to try to nudge people to get them to use multimodal forms of mobility. That business really evolved into much more working with workplaces and large cities and stadiums, arenas, convention centers, hotels, and really now with the workplace and trying to optimize the commute for employers and employees through kind of a combination of information and analytics and a couple of different products that we offer now. I want to give a couple of little anecdotes of a few different experiences I've had over the last year that might be helpful to think about how to respond. The first being Reopen DC and then Georgetown. So Reopen DC was quite an adventure. I was asked to join Mayor Bowser's committee to help reopen one of the largest world cities, DC, back in May. And I gotta say, it was quite the experience. I think I underestimated all that went into it. It was, for one, very time consuming. And I think it was 40 or 60 hours in 2 weeks. And I didn't know that's what I was signing up for, and it was all volunteer, but it was rewarding by the end of it, because I think we're one of the first cities to really put a framework in place to say, how do you reopen? I mean, these are big questions. How do you reopen a world capital? How do you get essential workers to work safely? How do you radically rethink the way that we use city streets or that we use parking or real estate? These are big questions and hopefully lasting answers that we can solve, quickly as a reaction, but I'm pretty hopeful that some of the things that we submitted to the mayor and were implemented can be long-term solutions. So that ended in May. And then this summer, I joined Georgetown University here in Washington as an entrepreneur in residence, which many people are like, okay, what is that? And really what it is, I'm a part-time faculty and I work with a lot of entrepreneurs from undergraduates all the way up to the alumni. And our program is based in the McDonough School of Business, but we talk with people all over the university. And one of the things that I was really struck by is maybe there's not so many transportation and mobility startups there. There are a few and some really smart minds trying to tackle big problems in transportation. But the one takeaway that I got having talked with a couple dozen entrepreneurs is it doesn't matter because a lot of the things that people are working on have a direct impact. So, if we work with people from the law school or foreign service or med school, you'd think, what does that have to do with transportation? But there's some logistics companies. And you think about if we improve last mile logistics for food delivery, it could get people off the road and it could reduce traffic loads. Or therapeutics from the med school could help bus drivers to not get the next wave of COVID or something else. So I try to think of it as more of a complete ecosystem, and transportation is always the backbone of every city. And I hope a lot of people recognize that. They do here in this room, but outside with funding and where transit agencies are today, it's a dire time. And I think, transportation is fundamental, and a lot of these other, technologies that are coming along can have direct impact, even if it's not a transportation startup. So in general, I'm really focused on tech and transportation entrepreneurship, but a lot of passion around biking and pedestrian safety, parking and land use, climate, which I think will have a lot greater impact in this new administration, and then ultimately commute trip reduction. So I will leave it there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ryan. And if anyone has any questions, just a reminder, you can put them in the chat and we'll ask them. I guess thinking about, the last 100 or so years, a lot of our cities across the world have been developed around the automobile, outside of maybe some of the older European cities that predated it. So what do you think with the pandemic, is it an opportunity to kind of change that culture? Will we see that transformative change that, we've done it one way for 100 years and we have our climate issues, we have our equity issues, we have so many different challenges. Do you think this is permanent change? Do you think this is temporary? How do we, our biggest challenge has always been people are creatures of habit, and making them change is difficult. But now the pandemic has changed many people's habits, in particular as it relates to commuting or how they get to and from. So I don't know what you all are hearing or thinking, or what you're looking to tackle with that. So maybe, how about Jordan? I'll ask you first.
Sure. A lot of what we've found is that the user, like our assumptions of what residents want, are just not reliable anymore. And so how we have to go back and listen to residents and customers and really level set in what their needs are and their expectations are, because I think they're going to evolve in phases of the reopening, just like they've evolved in phases of the shutdown and all of this. I think, how we come back and get people comfortable going back to work, there's an uncomfortable nature for our city, and probably for many cities, in that I think a lot of people do like working from home. But so much about what makes a city great is having these, these collision spaces of community between diversity and the movement, and supporting local, and having lunches downtown. It's what makes cities great organisms of life, and if we don't return to work, it's a big lifeblood that goes away. And so, but we can say, it takes how many days to form a habit, and 6 months to maybe get comfortable, and we're talking about a year plus in some regards. So there's every company, and we've done calls with 100 companies here, our largest employers here, and I haven't talked to one single one that said that everybody that worked in the office before is going to work in the office again. It might be 70% of their workforce comes back into the office, or it's some type of, flexible work policy that they don't anticipate, 5 days a week being the normal. Everybody has different levels of aggression of how they do that, but that dramatically changes how the travel patterns of our cities, the lifestyles on our streets. There's just so much that's impacted there. And so I don't have a silver ball. I think people really do want to be together. I think we are social beings. Like we like being around others. But the role of a workplace is going to change, and that's going to have a ripple effect on the community. I do think this commitment to cleanliness and is going to be very important. I was just talking to a developer this morning who's aspiring to build a flagship sustainable building here, and then they've already pivoted in their plans to incorporate all types of new technology that make sure things are more sanitary. The things are touchless, like the elevators are probably operated by your feet or like a phone. But I do think this sensitivity to cleanliness and the expectation that things are cleaner, especially in public spaces, will be, I think, one of the bigger impacts on operations long term. And there's a lot more, but I'll let others.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. How about Ryan? What do you think?
And it's such a hard question. It's so complex. And I think my feeling has probably shifted 3 or 4 times throughout the course of COVID, just because if you think back to March or April, you think this is just 2 weeks and then we're going to go right back to the office. You're kind of, change your mindset some, but I'm with Jordan. I think there's a couple long-term trends. One, I do believe with the new administration, there'll be a focus on climate as kind of a default in a lot of the decisions, and maybe it's hope, but I do think climate needs to be part of it, and carbon offsetting, carbon emitting things should be put at the back of the list. I think cleanliness is really important because, I'm a firm believer that there probably will be more COVID type situations. So preparing for the next one any way you can is important. And then the future of work is like the ultimate question to me. What will be the interaction between you and your job? And my personal opinion is that 1/3 of the time people will be working from home, 1/3 of the time you will be working at the office, and 1/3 of the time it will be somewhere else, a coffee shop or like a close to home or a workplace or a flex working place. And that could be 1 to 2 days a week. So that just means flexibility is key. The commute's going to be kind of unpredictable. It's not, I get in my car and I drive to a suburban campus and I park and drive home. So, options really matter. But I'd be lying if I said I had all the answers. I think right now there's so much in flux between the transition, the vaccine, the way that, these companies are moving at such a fast pace and changing their headquarters. It's just going to be interesting to see how the next 3 to 6 months shake out.
How about Roger?
Yeah, actually, sorry, I just changed my audio because I saw some in the comments there. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, hopefully this is a bit better than before. I think that we're faced with an incredible opportunity here to really try and push the needle when it comes to more active modes of transportation. Within the city of Toronto, and probably maybe the example I'll give in my city that could maybe apply across North America is the fact that there's just a lot more acceptance and willingness for more infrastructure to support active modes of transportation. So if I can give you a specific example, within the city of Toronto, we have our 10-year cycling infrastructure plan that was approved years ago. In fact, I think it was 2016, 2017. And it's one thing to say that our city council approved the plan overall in general, but when we really came to like painting the stripes on the street, we were met with nothing but objections, right? Taking away portions of a lane and the impacts it's going to have on traffic and all that sort of stuff. With the pandemic, we took the opportunity to really expand on that cycling network infrastructure tenfold. And in fact, it was very interesting because the very same councillors that were opposed to having bike lanes on certain, major streets were actually now advocating for it, right? And recognizing the fact that the residents, because they've been locked away in their houses through March and April, when the good weather came, were really keen on getting out there and being more active, walking around the neighborhoods, hopping on their bikes. So we really took advantage of the pandemic sort of lockdown to aggressively go about, and also traffic volumes, as I mentioned beforehand, being at a bit of a low. Now, here's the interesting thing. Obviously, we recognize that traffic volumes are eventually going to come back, but at the same extent, taking advantage of this sort of lull period to go nuts with this infrastructure. Now, in parallel with that, recognizing that people are also finding in Toronto, I'm sure many cities across North America, the fact that maybe things aren't as far away as you thought. So let me give you a specific example of what I'm talking about. Around our schools in Toronto, there's a very known problem of safety around schools because everybody wants to drive their kid to school. Because everyone got more active during the summertime, when schools reopened in September, we saw a marked increase of parents walking their kids to school. Why? Because now they regularly walk around the neighborhoods and suddenly they realize, geez, the school's not that far away. It doesn't really, I don't really necessarily need to drive my car to get there. So, I mean, it goes without saying, hopefully it should go without saying that being, overseeing traffic management within the city of Toronto, that myself and staff are very, very strong advocates of pushing and promoting the expansion of both cycling and pedestrian sidewalk infrastructure. And we're firm believers of the philosophy of build it and they will come. If you add extra lanes of traffic, you'll get more cars. If you add in bike lanes and you make options, viable options and alternatives for people, they'll look to use that as well too. So we're very keen on seeing that as things kind of transition back to normal. And yay, we've got the vaccine, so we're all looking to that kind of months from now, things slowly but surely kind of resuming normal conditions. But the infrastructure's changed, and hopefully people recognize that there's, because we took advantage of this lull period, there's more options for people. There's more cycling infrastructure. There's more sidewalks. The transit is much more efficient, but there's much more sustainable modes of getting to your place of work. That people will give more consideration to that on the go forward kind of thing.
Thank you. So thinking about, as it looks in the future, and if we have the scenario where X% are now working from home and not necessarily commuting, how do you think cities and communities should kind of plan for the future as far as taking those assets and maybe engaging in more public space, civic space for people to utilize, more cultural for people to come into? I don't know anything that maybe Columbus or Toronto or Ryan that you're hearing in DC that people are looking to do now. Because I think we've heard it from many large employers. I don't know if they'll ever go back to 100% in the office at the same time. Many of them are saying 70, 60, 50. Some are saying even more dramatic. So if that's the case, how do communities attract people into their communities and maybe rethink some of these, traditional office spaces and big buildings? So I don't know, Ryan, if you want to start.
I get pitched a lot of real estate tech companies that are conversions, right? So there's a lot of dying retail, or sadly, 50% of restaurants and small business owners are not going to be able to make it through. So what do you do with that space? What do you do with overloaded commercial space with floors and floors and floors in a building that are vacant? Creative. I mean, you get creative. Is it micro fulfillment? Is it, some other creative space? Is it schools? If there's a dearth of schools or childcare facilities, it's the ultimate question. But I look back at like 2009, 2008, at a time when, we were really dealing with the economic crisis. A lot of great companies were built out of that time. So I think about it now, I think this is the biggest opportunity for the next million and billion dollar company to be built, looking at the opportunities of really low prices, maybe for real estate, and a lot of needs on the ground. Cities were imperfect places before, imperfect organisms. So just because, the demand of people or the quantities of people are not going to be coming downtown, I think that's great. It's not necessarily a bad thing. In reopened DC, like 90% of the focus was, what do we do with the public streets and the public realm? And I think DC did a pretty good job of, creating outdoor spaces where people can eat, or more bike lanes and walkable pedestrian areas. The other thing is, I think biking's having a moment, e-bikes and just regular biking, which is something that I love because it's great for public health. It's a good land use. It doesn't take up a lot of space, and they're inexpensive. So, I'd love to see cities look at maybe e-bike rebates to give people money in their pocket if they want to choose to get rid of the car and go after an e-bike for commuting. And There are cargo e-bikes out there. I wish that I had more space to put it in my house because I would get one immediately. My kids love it, and it's great for, going around town, picking up things, the grocery store. It's a lot easier to get in and out than a car.
Great. Thank you. Roger.
Yeah, great question. I think there's, like most major cities, there's so much competition for the downtown space under normal circumstances, right? And there's two kind of key pressures that we say, for example, in Toronto, I'm sure again, across North America. One is the businesses that want to be downtown because it's sort of prestigious to be there. And the other's all these kind of major trip generation attractors, the live theaters, the kind of Broadway sort of environment, the waterfront related things, museums, this, that, the other. There's so many things, other things that attract trips to the downtown core. And as the big businesses, because they need less of a footprint, there's more, people working from home, that kind of thing. Our kind of hope and goal is to see that the balance kind of gets shifted to more of those other types of trip generators that really add to the vibrancy of the city. And why do you go into the downtown core? Is it because you have to because of work, or because there's all these other sort of things that are there to attract you to go, to spend your leisure time, to improve your quality of life, all that kind of stuff? So yeah, we definitely see that there's going to be a drop. I mean, a lot of companies, a lot of the big BIAs in Toronto have already been making announcements about, there's no going back for a certain percentage of their workforce, where if they don't need to be going in the office, they're going to continue working from home. But I do feel that space is going to get gobbled up very quickly, and fortunately be gobbled up by the other types of trip generators that are not so, AM, PM, peak orientated, that make it easier from us from a transit infrastructure management perspective to balance and manage that traffic, as opposed to, as I say, the sort of regular hard commuting traffic. And quite frankly, sorry, just last point on that, it's better for the businesses as well too, because one of the things that I think is often overstated is those individuals who live in the outreaches of Toronto, who commute in, they go into work and then they leave, and they don't take advantage of any of the big trip attractors kind of thing, right? It's just a lifestyle thing. Whereas if that component is taken out, you'll still see the business thriving and maybe even increasing to some extent, because that means there'll be other trip generators there.
Okay, great.
I think there's some other trends too, just interrelated into all of this as well. I think there's a little bit of gray space in understanding what the company's policies are going to be. Although our housing market is doing very well, I think as soon as you start to see those policies be more concrete, I think you're going to see an increase in homeownership, and buying the space that they want to work remote, whether that's further out in the city, but inevitably those home ownership rates will put pressure on affordable housing options. And so we're already have an affordable housing crisis. I don't think we're going to solve that anytime soon. I fear it might get worse, especially in mid-sized cities. I think you're going to see a flight of coastal cities into mid-sized cities, and some of these denser cities like you're observing on the West Coast. So we're watching those trends as well. I also think there's a few key demographics that are really important in this conversation. Our essential workers, who won't have the choice of working remotely. We've absolutely demonstrated the value and the necessity of public transit as an essential service in moving that workforce. But I think there's also this thing I fear, and this is something that I haven't really, studied necessarily, but something that I've been thinking a lot about is virtual redlining, where we have a population that can have a totally different set of opportunities and experiences with the power of technology, and another half of the community that's completely left behind. If this was in the physical manifestation, it would have been like redlining was, right? Whether you're going after a job and marketing yourself on LinkedIn, or getting skills training, telehealth, working from home. I was on the phone with a woman in one of our low income neighborhoods. She has 3 kids. She's got a job. She lost her job in COVID, and she's now a line chef, but she's searching for a remote work job because that's what she wants to. She wants to be at home, taking care of her sons, being more attentive to what her priorities are in life and having that flexible work. But she has skills gaps of getting a job that would afford her to work remotely. So I think there's going to be greater pressure than ever on closing skills gaps, upskilling, closing the digital divide, and making sure that if technology is key to our resiliency, not just for our systems, but for us as individuals and navigating, life, how do we make sure everyone's equipped to do so? Those are big things that I lose sleep over.
Yeah, I think it's great thoughts, and I think during this, everyone's so hyper focused on pandemic and getting out of it and what's next that there's a tendency to forget about the massive levels of unemployment and people that have their whole lives have shifted, and what that all looks like going forward, and providing for that opportunity and that training and the education to really have an equal part in that better society. I totally agree.
And just to go off that for a minute, I think it gets to this like newer urban planning framework of these 15-minute neighborhoods or cities, right? And from a transportation and a development, the relationship of that, but how do you make those affordable and attainable? The ones that are designed that way are, you're cost out of, although it's the ideal. So what I also acknowledge in all of this is a lot of our essential workers and the work that they do, they are commuting the longest to do that. So.
Yeah, I agree. You see a lot of wonderful things in Paris and London and other cities, but the affordability is just not there for the kind of average employee or someone that's working in a restaurant. Very challenging. So the other one, there's one question in the chat, and then we'll wrap it up, about thinking about public transit, and we're addressing climate. How do you see public transit responding? What can we all do collectively to make people feel comfortable to return to transit, which hopefully isn't as scary as that sounds. It doesn't take as long, but I don't know if what you all are thinking about that. Jordan, you want to kick that
off? I am carless here, which is not normal in Columbus, in our region. And I've ventured onto a bus. I've been using some of the ride sharing just to experience my own comfort levels and trying to understand. I think there's a lot you can do in the in-cabin, like the in-vehicle experience, but it's the optics of just getting to that I think is what we're going to have to overcome the most. It was the scariest doing it the first time, and then every time after that, I'm okay. And I think that's going to be true with everyone else. It's like just getting that first choice rider to go to transit is the hardest part. We have to do that all over again with a lot of our community, and so I think how we can do that is through trusted communication channels, like employers saying that they've talked to the transit authority and they agree that they're taking the right steps to keep you safe and they're doing the right wellness things. Those types of endorsers will help build confidence that they can get back to these commuting practices. I think another component of this too is going back to fundamentals of workplace time and arrival. Can we individualize, or can we allow for flexible work arrivals so that it's not so pressured on, well, I don't want to ride in this packed bus because I have to show up at 8. And I mean this more in hourly waged work, probably more than salaried work. I think the salaried work will be a little bit more lenient, that they could come in at 10. But I think the more that we could work together as a community to stagger some of these times for commuting will help us be able to manage crowd control, essentially, so that people can feel that personal space. So those are policies, but those are fundamental to what drives demand and discomfort in the first place.
Yeah, I agree. About Roger?
Actually, if I can sort of repeat what Jordan said on the first point, because I totally agree. The whole idea of trying to get people to stagger their start times to minimize that whole situation of people being packed at subway stations or bus stops, that kind of thing. I mentioned too, our specific situation whereby despite the fact that ridership is at a low because of the pandemic, we still see crowding on buses. And that's largely due to the fact that we've always had this philosophy of just cramming as many buses as we can down a route, as opposed to taking more of a schedule adherence type approach. Because really and truly, the name of the game right now for our transit guys is trying to achieve that bit of balance between how many people you have waiting at the stop and how many people you physically have on the bus to ensure that that sort of social distancing. Above all else, though, in terms of just generally speaking, pandemic or not, trying to get more people towards transit. One of our biggest problems, I'm sure is a big problem for most jurisdictions, is that last mile. And the fact that, I happen to live up in the suburbs relative to Toronto, and it's a good 10, 15 minute walk from my house and the bird's nest of house to get to the bus stop. So, especially, I'm a big guy, so maybe I'm not afraid to be walking late at night to the neighborhood like that. But my wife, my daughter's kind of thing, it's not necessarily the safest thing, or they may not necessarily feel safe walking down, long, dark streets in the dead of cold winter, that kind of thing. And I don't, within the city, we do have some things to help with that in a number of jurisdictions as well, too, like the bike share and stuff like that, that you can take the bike home and then ride to the bus stop and all that sort of thing. But I don't know that I necessarily have the answer to that, in Folsom. But I definitely recognize that as an issue that I think as overall as an industry, we need to really wrap our heads around, is that whole last mile piece.
Great. Yeah, I agree. So Ryan, from your perspective, and what's going to come out that's going to solve this on the entrepreneurial side?
Well, there's not much that Jordan and Roger haven't already said. I think that there were great points. The only thing I would add is that it just comes from leadership at the top and communicating. And I feel pretty good about our new Secretary of Transportation nominee, Mayor Pete. I think if anything, he's a great communicator. So if he can clearly and succinctly break down very complex things like why it's safe and really follow the science and follow the data as opposed to making it political, I think we're better off right there to just following the science and clear communication from the top, and all the things from flexible work and off-peak and last mile are all critical as well.
Great. Thank you. Well, I just wanted to thank you for, all three of you taking the time out of your days. I really appreciate it. It's one of the positives of the kind of Zoom COVID world that we're all living in, that we can connect with people in ways, and I'd probably be running to 5 different meetings right now. So I don't miss that aspect. I'm sure none of you do. But no, I wanted to thank you. It's great to hear how things are going in Toronto, Roger. Look forward to staying in touch on the Move To program and how that's implemented. And Jordan, smart cities, and pretty cool to hear how Columbus continues to evolve and innovate and be a pilot. So kudos to you for leading that. And for Ryan, can't wait to see what the next great entrepreneurial thing comes out, and then who you led for that, and love working with you as well. So and thank you again to Lois and Wendy and Lisa and the DSM&G team for partnering with us, and our team, Maureen and Stacy. And that's pretty much it. So have a great rest of your day. It's 82alliance.com, and thank you again.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Happy
Happy holidays.
holidays.
Bye.